why don't we start there, okay?
We like to keep it down.
I get you, I understand. I'm thinking that if you could tell us who were born, where you live, your education and work experience, why you decided to get involved in politics, and the accomplishments in the legislature of which you are most proud.
That sounds like a job interview.
They don't have to worry for a couple of years.
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead.
Sure, I'm Joe Fitzgibbon. I've been in the State House of Representatives representing this community for 8 years. Where was I born? I was born in Kirkland. Gosh, what were all the other questions?
Your
My
education.
education. I have a bachelor's from a small college in southern Illinois. I grew up a lot of places. My dad was in the Navy, but mostly Burien. Burien is where I lived most of my time while I was in, since I've been in office, although I live in West Seattle now. My work experience. Before I ran for office, I was a legislative assistant to our outgoing Senator Sharon Nelson when she was in the State House. I also served on the Burien Planning Commission. I was the chair of the Burien Planning Commission for a while. I'm the chair of the House Environment Committee. Environmental issues were the thing that first got me motivated to get involved in politics, but my interests have since grown to cover other things. But the environment is still very near and dear to my heart, and the issue I work on the most, trying to protect and recover our Puget Sound and our orca and salmon populations, trying to fight climate change, protect our air quality and water quality, and those have been the biggest focuses of my work. And we were both just re-elected this fall, and we'll be continuing as the chairs of our respective committees in the upcoming session.
That was impressive.
Well, as you can imagine, my history's a little longer than his. But I'm Eileen Cody, and I was born in Jefferson, Iowa, raised on a family farm in Iowa, moved here to Seattle after I graduated from college. Actually, I've got to remember all the questions. I got a bachelor's in nursing from Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska. Moved here after I graduated. I had met a guy I thought I was going to marry. Thank God I didn't marry that one. That's why I moved to Seattle. And actually, he graduated from West Seattle High, so that's why I moved into West Seattle. And he's moved out, and I'm still in West Seattle. So, and let's see. I'm trying to think I'm a nurse and have worked at Group Health, now Kaiser. It's hard for me to remember to say Kaiser. For 40 years, that was the job I got, and I'm going to retire. I'll announce January 9th. From Kaiser. And I should be clearer about that. I'm so excited. But actually, I should say I'm retiring because they make you take a 6-month leave between the time you can work per diem and the time you retire. And since this is a 4-month legislative session, that it fits. So I can retire, and then when I want to take my vacations next year, I want to go to Africa on a safari. This is for my 65th birthday. I'm insisting that my husband take me to Africa. And so that's why I can take a month off and not have to feel guilty about it. And I'm the chair of the House Healthcare Committee and have been for 20 years. I've been in for This will be my 25th session. I'm the most senior member of the House, and I have been around a while. So that's why I'm a little surprised if they don't know who I am, because I've been representing this district for a while. And I've had White Center North Highline the whole time, even though I started out in the 11th and got moved to the 34th. I didn't move, the district did. So, and then healthcare is the reason I ran. I was the treasurer of the nurses union at Group Health. That's what got me involved in politics, believing that everybody had a right to health care. And that's what got me, and I'm still working on it. And Donald Trump keeps me in office. That's what
Thank you very much. There were a lot of things you just said that I did not know. So I appreciate that.
Principia College in Elsa, Illinois.
Okay. I've never heard of it, and I grew up in Illinois.
It's near St. Louis.
Oh, okay. I was there once.
On the Illinois side or the Missouri side?
It's in Illinois. Oh, sorry, you're not asking.
Go on. Dick.
Was it? Oh, Illinois. Yeah.
Okay. So, this might be more your kind of question, but I'm interested in your take too. I got an email yesterday, or the day before, saying that the legislature is looking at doing an update of the Growth Management Act.
There are certain legislators who are interested in certain specific changes to the Growth Management Act going different directions. There's not, you know, the legislature is 147 people, and there's always a couple people who have ideas that are divergent from others. I'm very interested in the Growth Management Act, and it's one of the issues that the Environment Committee, which I chair, has jurisdiction over. So I guess I don't know exactly which idea you're referring to, but there's two ideas that have been floated recently. One by a very conservative Republican senator from Eastern Washington who has proposed many times to basically, I don't want to say repeal the Growth Management Act, but basically remove the enforcement mechanisms that keep counties from paving over farmland and forest land and rural areas. So that's not one that I support. I don't support the other one either, which is from a Democratic senator from the Bothell area, and he wants to require minimum density around certain areas in the state, basically areas that are in proximity to frequent transit. And so I sort of agree with his goal there, but I don't think that he's going about it in the way that would work for most cities. I don't think we should be writing local zoning code into state law, and that's kind of the approach that he's choosing to take. I think that that in areas that, particularly areas where there's going to be, for example, Sound Transit light rail service, those are good places for us to grow the housing supply as people continue to move to the region. But I don't think that the way he's done it now is appropriately takes into account community concerns around, and I just don't think it's drafted in a way that would work for most communities. So while I do think that we need to grow the supply of affordable housing in the region, we need to do it in the right places, and we need to do it with appropriate input from our communities that are impacted. So we will be talking about the Growth Management Act. We talk about the Growth Management Act every year. The last couple of years, the changes we've made have been small. We've been kind of addressing local problems, I guess. But we do look at it every year. It's a very big law that affects every community in the state, and it's one that I'm always happy to hear what your interests are there and how we can help advocate for that.
Oh, we might do that. And do you have any?
Growth management, not my area.
SEPA, yes. Also, so SEPA is the State Environmental Policy Act. It's a much older law than the Growth Management Act, and it's basically, it's a law that requires that governments evaluate the environmental impacts of their actions before they take them. And the way that it is most commonly applied is related to land use actions. And so before a city or a county approves a development over a certain size or makes a zoning change, for example, they have to review all of the potential environmental impacts, very thorough review of the potential environmental impacts from that change. That's another one that we do look at every year because in a lot of ways it hasn't really kept pace with a lot of the other laws that have come in since. For example, SEPA was passed in 1970. The Growth Management Act was passed in 1990 and 1991. We've never really synced those up. There's a lot of other land use laws that have come into place since 1970, and so one of the things that I'm always interested in working on is how do we sync up better the existing laws that we have so that they're not working at cross purposes. And often SEPA works at cross purposes with, for example, growth management. And so that is definitely something that I want to take a look at, although I haven't heard a specific proposal coming down the pipe on that, but I'm spent a lot of time working on SEPA, and I'm interested in that.
The reason I'm interested is because about 2 years ago, developer, a low-income housing group of private investors from California applied for a SEPA, was an application that they fill out the form and they disclose what they think the impacts are gonna be of their project. So this is a 4-building, almost 300-unit development at Top Hat. It's just now, I think, being rented out. They submitted the document to the county and estimated that there would be 1 person in a 1-bedroom, 3 people in a 2-bedroom, 5 people in a 3-bedroom, for 624, a total of 624 people, more or less, in those 4 buildings. That's a lot of people, but not crazy, and clearly there's a need for housing, right? However, this spring, they started advertising, and the numbers changed. For the 1-bedroom, it went to 3 people. For the 2-bedroom, it went to 5 people. For the 3-bedroom, it went to 7 people. So being who I am, I went back to the county, and I said, I multiply all this out, I'm looking at over 1,100 people instead of 600 more or less. The county got some information from them, has decided that it's likely that there will be nearly 900 people in there. Shouldn't there be some ramification, or shouldn't they be submitting accurate information? Because even if it's 800, that's a lot of people in Top Hat. No grocery stores.
Where's the development?
At Top Hat on
Under
First
12th
Avenue.
and First Southwest, South.
Yeah. So, that sounds cozy. 3 people in a 1-bedroom. I live in a 1-bedroom, 2 of us, and it feels cozy. So 3 and 1, that sounds like a lot. I guess the 2 things I can say about that without knowing more about what their submittal was is when an applicant fills out what's called the SEPA checklist, which is that
Yes.
document where they say what they think the environmental impacts will be of their proposal. Then it goes to the local government, and the local government either determines it to be to have a significant or a non-significant environmental impact. And that action is one that a citizen can come in and say, we don't think this is the right determination, or we don't think that this review is adequate, and file an appeal. And that happens a lot, and especially happens a lot in Seattle. It actually doesn't happen as much really anywhere besides Seattle, where neighbors take such an active interest in their neighborhoods. Unfortunately, the way that, once they've passed that window of time when an impacted neighbor can file an appeal, then, that's how the law is constructed now. And so I guess what I would say, though, is if the applicant submitted information in their SEPA checklist that they knew was false, or if they intentionally, made false statements in their SEPA checklist, that is not okay, and that would be a problem that could lead to their SEPA review getting reopened.
But when they changed the numbers, was it in another, updating their SEPA review, or was
No.
it an ad in the paper?
No, it was a meeting that was held,
Mm-hmm.
and their management company came
Mm-hmm.
and gave those numbers.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, you're not allowed to make a false statement in a submittal to a government agency, so that would be something I'd want to learn more about.
Yeah, because, it's, in Seattle, people have more money than we do. And to file an appeal is a pricey thing. So that really puts us in a bad position because we have no input. Like, a few days before they had to publish the notice in the first place about the, we had a NUAC CSA meeting, Community Service, meeting with the county, and they did not tell us about it. Like, less than a week later, the ads were in the paper. So they knew what was going on. But the information was not distributed to this community.
The information when they filed their permit application, or the
Yes,
information about them?
That they
Yeah, I mean,
knew.
they are required when there's a SEPA determination, it's the local government's responsibility to provide notice to the community, and there's a lot of requirements in the law about, sort of how big of a radius around the project proposal they need to notify the neighbors, so that's something I definitely want to find out about.
Joe, kind of a more general question then, since you're at the state level. I certainly understand where Liz is coming from. Is there any way to help communities that don't have the money for the lawyers? That's basically this area here. We don't have thousands of dollars to go hire a lawyer and say, see, that's wrong. Now we're going to take this to court or in front of a review board or whoever's necessary. I don't know if there's any way you could help at the state level or not to make it less expensive maybe to file an appeal. I don't even know the costs, Liz may know.
Well, the cost would be, the cost would be, if you hired a lawyer, I mean, the cost wouldn't, the cost isn't to file the appeal itself. The local government wouldn't charge the cost for that. I guess, I know that there's community groups that do take interest in this and that might be interested in partnering with a community like White Center if there was a project that was of concern for you. But I don't know of a way that the state could provide the money for
I'm not sure, but again, I spend a lot of time in the community and with groups, stuff like that. And consistently I hear that people here work a lot. And like the New Start High School, some of the kids are in trouble because the parents are working all the time. They can't afford not to work. Or the kids are working themselves to help support the family. And yet, so they don't have time. They may not even hear about it, first of all. But if they do, then what do? Because we don't have the community groups that have the money to, you go to Queen Anne or somewhere and they've got the money, realistically. And that's why I think we have a lot of low-income housing in this area, because we haven't been able to try to work out an equitable with King County over it, and we just don't have the resources to do that. So I don't know.
Is there anything that could be done if there's an update to make the standards more specific?
I mean, it sounds to me, without knowing the full facts of the case beyond what you've just shared, that the issue would be if the applicant was submitting information in their SEPA checklist to King County that they knew was false. They were submitting application there, and then on the other side of the mouth, they're advertising that more people are actually going to live there than they submitted in their environmental checklist. Then that is something that they could be held accountable for. But yeah, it would be possible if we do revisions to SEPA to clarify that or to strengthen that. But it may be that, based on what you've just shared, that's concerning under current law.
Joe, is part of the SEPA requirements notifying the local school district? That was another piece of the same scenario.
Yeah.
At the time this was happening and the notice just got out to the community, our Highline School District was having a lot of public meetings about their capital fund levy coming up. And at one of those meetings, I myself brought up the question to the board, were they aware of this particular proposal of housing, because this number of families that would be coming there were certainly going to impact the school district. They had no idea. They had not been notified in any way.
I believe that the school district would be one of the local agencies that is supposed to be notified when there's a project in their jurisdiction. I'd have to double check the Washington Administrative Code, which is where all those notice requirements are spelled out. But it does. I believe that a school district would be required to receive notice, under that.
Some of the impact fees,
Well, yeah, I don't think that the
schools.
Highland School District is impacted. Well, I'm actually not
Yeah.
sure about that.
Just
Yeah,
another
I mean,
piece
but,
that we
yeah,
can
that's
do.
a
Because
interesting
this
one.
one location is going to have a big impact on just one elementary
Yeah.
school in our community. They all will have to funnel to this. I mean, unless there's a few older kids that funnel
Yeah.
to the middle school,
Yeah.
but it's gonna really impact one school.
Yeah.
That's not large enough now.
But it sort of sounds like deja vu of the homeless shelter that was sent out, and North Highline was not notified. It came out late. School district was not notified. What is with this? I mean, it sounds like deja vu all over again. And there's been several meetings with King County, and the same thing is happening again. I mean,
Well, like I said, I think the school district should have received notice, and
and why
I can
didn't
double
they?
check.
I mean, it's the same thing that happened at the last with the low barrier shelter. I mean, did we not learn anything from that? That we're repeating history?
Well, so this is an issue between King County and the
So we need
school
to-
district, and it's one that, we need to look into if that was, if the right notice was sent out there. But that's, the state's job is to pass the law and to expect that local governments will comply with the law, and it's, we want to look into that.
Please do, and if you can make it stronger. The reason I asked about the Growth Management Act was because I tried to read it one time.
Yeah, don't do that.
And what became obvious to me was that it was very focused on rural areas and how to protect them. And pretty much saying the rest of you are urban. And didn't say much about maintaining the quality of life or the environment in urban areas. And it seems like the Growth Management Act should be focusing on both areas.
Mhm.
So that's why I think it could use an update.
Yeah, so the Growth Management Act has 14 goals that the law spells out what they are, and they're very, sometimes they're in conflict with each other. So housing affordability, protecting the environment, preventing sprawl, preventing traffic congestion and those things, right? You can imagine how sometimes those things are at cross purposes. I will say that I agree with you in general. The Growth Management Act has been much more successful at preventing the paving over of farmland and forests and the rural areas than it has about effectively addressing problems in urban areas. So that's one of the things that has really just become very clear in the last couple of years, that it can't just be about addressing impacts on the rural landscape. Even though those are the goals that are spelled out in the law, the actual mechanics of the law tend to be pretty focused really on county decision-making in areas that are rural. And all of the North Highline area is designated as urban, and so the urban-rural distinction is sometimes it's counterintuitive. Suburban is included in urban. The line between urban and rural is like out in Maple Valley and Covington and all that. So the law doesn't do a great job of differentiating the treatment of urban areas that have different local contexts, and that's definitely something that we want to work to improve.
What's interesting in that statement is that we, in this unincorporated area, follow rural rules, even as far as streetlights, as far as the roads maintenance, as far as no sidewalk, and so they follow, and no trash pickup,
Yeah.
So yet, they're following those rural rules where it works for the county, but not for the community, and then the urban rules.
Yeah, and this is a long-standing issue in this
Yeah.
community, is the
Well, and
counties.
that the county has wanted to get the ones that are surrounded by cities to incorporate. I mean, you all know that?
Yeah, for a long time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like 20 years, I think.
Yes, exactly.
I was wondering, can we get on to some other questions?
Yes.
Particularly I was thinking about the medical side of things and what's going to happen with state funding, with the changes going on at the federal level, potential changes, the lawsuits going back and forth, and how is that impacting you and your ability to provide health care for as many people as possible in this state?
Well, we've been lucky. We have, this state has been very successful under the Affordable Care Act. We have our own exchange that we've operated. We have put a lot of the Affordable Care Act into state statutes so that if any, that's what we did a lot of that last year, just in case they were able to repeal. But now, we're a little bit, I'm breathing a little easier after the elections. But we are continuing to look at making sure that we add language and to shore up the whole thing. The other thing that we're looking at is affordability is still an issue. I'm sure if any of you are buying your own insurance, that you know affordability is a big issue. And so we're looking at trying to develop a public option where the state would do the purchasing, and if and when the state has the money, that we would add some more subsidies besides what federal subsidies there are. Because really, the area where people are having the hardest trouble with purchasing is those that are, now this is going to sound like a lot of money, but if you probably, it's a lot of you in the room, that's 300 to 500% of poverty. That's where the drop off from the federal, 400% is where there's no support from the federal government or tax credits from the federal government. So when we look at on the exchange who's dropping coverage, it's that percentage, because we've been successful with the lower income people. They get enough tax credits and they can choose to buy like a bronze plan and actually do pretty well. It's when you're up a little higher, making some money, but not Bill Gates, right? So that's where a lot of the difficulty is at. So we're trying to look at that. Let's see that's on the purchasing on healthcare stuff that we're specifically. The other thing that I will just say, it's a big healthcare issue, which I'm sure you all will agree, is our behavioral health system with mental health and getting access for people. You know, we've got like Western State has been decertified by the federal government in what the care that we are giving down there. We're under a lawsuit and for people that are arrested and need to be evaluated whether they're competent or not. We're being fined monthly on that. So I will say behavioral health is somewhat a mess right now. I will say it's been a mess. I feel like I think I've always say I feel like Sisyphus on this one, because I keep moving and then it just they haven't made a lot of success. I'll put it that way. But the good thing is that over the last couple of years, this is an issue we have been working together bipartisan. It's not one side or the other on this, and we have made the decision, the commitment that we would move people out of Western and get the care more into the communities all over across the state and have smaller hospitals. Western State is the largest, we're the only state that still has a huge mental health facility like that. And if you ever have been down to Western or around it, it's so old, and we can't actually deliver care there effectively, because that's not the way, it's not safe. That's part of the reason we got decertified. We were trying to wire it for electronic medical records, and then that created fire hazards because they had to put holes in the walls, and you don't even want to know. It's constantly been something like that. So we finally got everybody to agree that we would start moving the civil patients. Those are the people that are involuntarily committed but have not committed a crime. That those are the ones that we will be trying to move out of Western and build facilities around. We've been lucky enough, we've been trying to get some of the rural areas to think about it, because we've got a lot of rural hospitals that are not making money. They don't have very many patients in those rural areas. And if we could, we'd like to use buildings we already have. But the problem is getting a workforce into the rural area, because, people psychiatrists don't want to live in, Republic for some reason. I don't understand it. But we're trying to work on those issues to be able to get more people in and we did get Toppenish, which is just outside of Yakima, has agreed to take, and so we gave them the money so they could harden. You have to make sure that people can't hang themselves, all this kind of thing. So the unit, and they're gonna start in January being able to take, they're gonna take 16 patients, and it's a smaller unit, but at least we're gonna get some out, and so we've been trying to do that type of thing in mental health, but substance use disorder is a huge problem. When they were talking about the needles in the park, that's, drugs is still continuing to be opioids, the biggest part, but you probably read in the paper, fentanyl from China is becoming we're seeing on the increase, and actually meth is going back up again. It had been down for a while, but it's starting to go back up. So the opioid crisis, though, is still the biggest, where we're losing the most lives. That people, and it's not just heroin; it's people that are getting opioids from their doctor. So we've been trying to move on that. And actually, we passed a bill in the House last year. It was governor request and AG. Well, it was the governor's request bill. The AG had one. We had about 10 bills, and I rolled them all up in one, which was my mistake, because it passed the House unanimously and got over to the Senate and got into problems, and we didn't get it passed. So we're going to restart with that bill this year. But we're doing, at least that's the thing I've been happy about, is that when it comes to behavioral health and substance use, it has not been a partisan issue. We're working together. And it's because it's an issue that is across the state. It's in every district. It's in every community, and that's changed, I think, the people's perceptions that we can work together on that. So that's my one bit of good news that I'll say on it. So, I don't know any other specifics.
How many times have you had actually in the legislative session discussed like Western State or any of these issues that you were just discussing?
Oh, how many we discussed it? Oh my God!
How much time have you actually spent in the last session?
A lot. And we've had probably for the last 4 years, we've had a interim committee that meets, I don't know how many times, almost monthly. It seems, I know last year was monthly. That is looking at the quality of the care in Western State, and it's been meeting. So it's been a focused topic for a while, trying to figure out how we're going to work our way out of the problems. I know that it sounds like we aren't moving, but we've been putting a lot of money into mental health if we go back and look, there's been money going in. It's just that we were so far behind that it takes a long time to figure its way out of that.
What about
Welcome.
state funding?
About state fund?
Money.
Oh, that's what I'm saying. I think we're gonna see a lot of more money going into mental health this year.
I was kind of more beyond that, the whole state.
Oh,
I work in a retail environment, and I get people coming in and say, "Oh, my property tax just increased so much," and they're really angry about it, and they have no idea what the money goes for. At least a couple people, they have no clue. I try to help them a little bit, but they don't know that that's the way we run the state, because we don't have the best tax system in the world.
Yeah, right.
In fact, the worst in the United States, whatever.
Right, yes, we do have a rather regressive tax system. One way to put it.
The property tax increase was really big this year, and that's something that has impacted a lot of people. We hear about that a lot. The big increase was for education, and we've been dealing with this problem with public schools in McCleary for 7 years or so. The property tax increase was not the solution that we wanted. We were supporting a capital gains tax, which would really help change help ask people, really wealthy people who are not paying taxes very much to support that. But that was not what the Republican Senate would agree to. The good news is the property taxes are currently scheduled to go down kind of a lot next year. And so this was a really difficult year. This was the year when the state levy went up and the local levies are going to go down next year, but this is the year that they were both. The state levy had gone up and the local levies hadn't gone down yet. So I think people will be, I expect people will see a lower property tax bill next year, but I know that this year it's something we hear about everywhere.
Well, and also your property taxes go up with the value of the property going up, and that doesn't help matters either in this. Somebody over here.
And for
And
where
who are you?
And so, let me ask the question first.
You didn't do the intro.
And
where your property taxes go, the King County Assessor's Office has a really good website with information about where that is. You write your check to King County, and so often the perception is that King County, I have all that money to spend, and it's far from the truth, because just over 50% of, we act as the bank collecting property taxes for all kinds of local governments. And then we send it out to those governments. And 52%, I believe, of every property tax dollar goes to local school districts, hospital districts, cemetery districts, water and sewer districts, and the county. And so to actually get an idea of where those funds are going, either the assessor's office or get in touch with me, I'd be happy to put people in touch with that
And
resource.
who are you, sir?
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Joe Mcdermott. I'm your King County Council member. I've had the pleasure of serving on the council for 8 years last month and finishing my 3rd year as chair of the council. Have had the honor of representing North Highline and White Center throughout my work in public service. The last 8 years on the county council, and for 10 years prior to that in the legislature, both in the House and Senate.
Can I ask you a few more questions?
Of course.
Where were you born? Where do you live? What is your education and work experience? Why did you decide to get involved in politics? I've got one more.
She wants to know what your astrological sign is.
I'm Cancer. And keep track and let me know when I'm done what questions I've forgotten in that list.
I'll try.
Okay.
Yeah. Born.
I'm a lifelong West Seattleite and grew up in West Seattle. By the time I was in high school, people wanted to know what I was going to do when I grew up. And I told them I wanted to be a civil engineer. I was good in math and problem solving, and I was going to design bridges. I chose my college in part based on its School of Engineering. In May of my senior year in high school, I went to Washington, D.C. for the first time on a school program on a trip that I paid for by scooping ice cream at Husky Deli. And that week decided that I wanted to go into public service. Seeing government up close that week was really an opportunity for me to see that government and public service as a way to affect a positive change for a large number of people. And that's a passion I wanted to be able to pursue. I showed up at Gonzaga that fall and switched my major from civil engineering to history and political science, and have never looked back. Though I do still think I'm designing bridges and solving problems. And after undergrad, worked for a couple years, and then went back and earned a master's degree at the University of Washington, the Evans School in Public Affairs. And have I left any questions out? Immediately worked for the Pierce County Prosecutor's Office as a grant administrator for 6 years, actually when I was earning my master's degree. And then when I finished the degree, was hired as a senior budget analyst for the Seattle School District. I worked for the Seattle School District for 4 years, including my first couple years as a legislator. And when that was no longer a good balance to try to legislate and be a budget analyst at the same time, I became a tour guide for the next 7 summers. When I was a legislator, I worked as a tour guide with the Underground Seattle Tours, using my history degree.
Voted the best job of all of them. We all thought that was the best job.
I got to tell bad jokes to tourists, and I got a new audience every 2 hours. What wasn't to love about that job? This job I have to wear long pants. I can't wear shorts.
And you don't get tips.
That's true.
Thank you very much.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
We replace our schools with, when the need arises, for the safety of our children and for expansion. Why don't we demolish Western and build a new facility? We got the land.
It's designated as a historical property. So
Really?
that's the other reason that it's hard to change it. So,
And it's
I want to sell it to
600 million
McDermott.
dollars.
That's been my suggestion, but nobody's going for it yet. But we can develop the rest of the property, but the main building that's the oldest building on the campus, which is where most of the civil commitments is historical.
Really?
It was what was it originally? It was something with the service, or military, I can't
Oh,
remember.
I bet it was.
As maybe a military house, I can't remember now what it was originally built as, but we can't make a lot of changes to it, so that's the real reason why. We talked about that, I've learned all of these things over the last several years of why we couldn't do some of this stuff.
That makes
So
sense.
I have a question. So, and it has to do with this community, so perhaps Joe Mcdermott might be the appropriate person, but you two can chime in. So we have a lot of these, what seems to be antiquated zoning regulations here, where many years ago, properties pretty much west of 16th Avenue in White Center were platted on 2,500 square foot lots. And it doesn't mean, what I was told by Kevin McClare at Deeper, it wasn't meant to be buildable lots. It was like people bought lot number 10, 11, 12. So like my property, I have 3 2,500 square foot platted lots and part of another, and then my neighbor has part of the rest of that. So what people are doing all throughout our neighborhood are kind of getting around these development issues where they're building developments, but they're not considered developments because they're getting permitted for each individual 2,500 square foot lot. So they can build 14 homes without it being a development, without any mitigation for water runoff, for street damage, for, all the other issues that go along with, they've cut down 100-foot trees, clear-cut properties, and not had to plant or even put in a blade of grass. And so it just seems that, and I get calls from developers all the time that they want to buy my house and the house next door to tear them down and put 10 houses up. So this is going on, and it's been going on for a while in our community, and it's really damaging to the community. When I talked with Kevin LeClaire about some issues, in particular what was going on where I live, and he said, yeah, they're getting around this isn't working, we have to change it, but it's not changing, and it's not stopping. And I think in the future, we're gonna look back and say, we made a big mistake. And the irony is, King County's saying, let's go out and plant 1 million trees, but meanwhile, they've clear-cut everything on my street. And so, I'm wondering how that can be addressed. And where does that need to go to be addressed?
We want some level of development and new homes and new housing in the community, but we need to make sure that that's built responsibly. And what you're describing, Barbara, is people skirting an idea of a large-scale development and not getting permitted for the large-scale development, and the larger impact they're going to have to the community in construction runoff and impacts, particularly during construction, to the site and the neighbors. And I've heard you speak before about the impact you've had with some of the construction in your neighborhood. And so we need to make sure that zoning and applications are seen as one larger set and not let them get away with individual pieces.
Right.
I would suggest 2 avenues to be able to address that in the very short term. One is next year, the permitting department for the county will be doing a neighborhood plan here in North Highline White Center. And they'll be here, and there'll be many other venues throughout North Highline throughout the year in various phases, getting input and suggestions and soliciting your concerns, ideas, hopes and dreams for your community. And this should be something that comes up early, and that we collectively, all of us, are not satisfied with a result until it's addressed.
What's the name of that group?
The permitting department will do a sub-area plan, is the planning walkout name for it. And secondly, as of the first of the year, we will formally have a Department of Local Services within King County, which I think is an honest recognition that we haven't provided the local government services to unincorporated King County, where we are your local government, as well as we should. And services that have served you are in the planning department, and it's in the transportation department, and it's public health, and it's here and there and spread out. The Department of Local Services will combine particularly permitting and roads, permitting being particularly applicable to your question, and be a one-stop resource for people with information to have better information about how to interact with the county, and where you need, if it's not within the Department of Local Services, to be able to connect you with where that is. And for those departments, such as public health, that have a role here but aren't part of the local services department, the department is executing management agreements between the two departments, specifically documenting the cooperation that the Department of Local Services and frankly the county expects of those other departments, and the responsiveness and engagement that they need to have to local services to be engaged. Also within the new Department of Local Services is an economic development staffer that we have not had before. And as that person gets hired early in the new year and comes up to speed, I'm going to encourage them to make their first stop to be here in White Center, to reach out to the business community and the broader community to be able to support economic development that works and is wanted here by the community.
Is there going to be an office near here? Because now we have to go to Snoqualmie, right, to go to deeper.
The service base will continue to be, the department will serve the urban unincorporated pockets, such as North Highline and Skyway, Vashon, and much of East King County. I actually am not sure where the director's office or the other staff will be located right now. John Taylor is the new director, will be the new director. The council's committee of the whole approved his nomination for the director position on Wednesday morning, and will be before the full council for confirmation on Monday.
That's encouraging.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, we need help, and we have for a long time. So I'm glad to.
It's a real recognition by the executive, Dow Constantine, who he and Deputy Executive Fred Jarrett spent a year really thinking about what parts needed to come into one department, and then Fred really came up with the idea of those contracts between the department and others that are providing services to make sure there's a level of accountability and engagement, because you shouldn't be shortchanged. There are challenges. I'm not going to deny that there are challenges in providing urban level services to unincorporated King County urban areas for what is designed to be a regional government. But if we are your local government, we need to do our best to provide those local services. And this is, I think, a solid step in recognizing some inadequacies, if not failures, in the past, and looking to find stronger ways to do that.
Any news on, are we coming other than a King County urban area?
Annexation?
Yeah, annexation, from the state level, which the state's been involved in the past, and obviously Joe here at the local.
Yeah, I'm not aware of current or active conversations with any of the three cities bordering North Highline about putting together a PAA, potential annexation area.
It's been a couple of years since Seattle said anything about it.
Yes, but they went to the Boundary Review Board, and they said they were going to put it on our ballot by 2018. They told the Boundary Review Board that. That was after the county, I don't know if you were there, Jill, at that time, so I don't think I can blame you. Interfered and got Burien, encouraged Burien to step away, leaving only Seattle. So,
This was after the Burien vote?
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
so
why it's up
we're
in the
stuck
air.
with Seattle
Yeah,
now or no one.
Yeah, well, unless Seattle chooses to de-designate their PAA, which they have not done. I mean, I think if there was support on the Seattle council to move forward with an annexation vote, they would have done so by now, and so I think that there's just disagreement there. But as you're right, because Burien de-designated their PAA, they're no longer able to offer annexation of Burien as an option for North Highline unless Seattle backs off. Whereas the previous council, there's a new council in Burien. Of course, Councilmember Marks had to leave, but the old council decided they didn't want to be involved anymore, and I think that was a mistake. Our role as the state is to maintain the annexation tax credit, so that when a city chooses to annex an unincorporated area in King Pierce or Snohomish County of a certain size, which North Highline is, that the state provides a pretty substantial amount of money to that local government to
It's a dowry.
to bring, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a dowry. Think of it as a dowry. And actually, North Highline has a special carve-out for a much larger incentive, a much larger dowry. So whenever North Highline does vote to become part of a city, there's that money provided by the state. We work hard to keep that.
So it still is active then? Because I think at one
Not
point.
really, it doesn't sound like to me.
Well, it's
So,
active from the state's perspective, and then
Yeah,
if
no,
if a
money's
city,
there.
if a
It's
city,
present and available.
yeah.
However, Seattle's told the Boundary Review Board that they were going to do it within a certain amount of time. They have not done that. They've been talking about it for nearly 20 years. And not one vote has been put before the people of North Highline by Seattle. At what point is Seattle asked to step up or shut up?
Well, I think that's a good conversation to have with some Seattle council members, because if they wanted to offer that choice to the voters of North Highland, they could do that.
I don't think North Highland wants to go to Seattle, though.
No,
We've
I don't
always been
think
a
so
part
either.
of Burien, Highline, our school districts are together. We always played our games at Memorial State, at the stadium. Our library system. Our family, or whatever community, is south to Des Moines, from Des Moines here. It's not Seattle. We have no interest in Seattle.
I mean, of course,
It's not part of our,
The problem is that when Burien did offer the choice to the voters of this part of what is it, Area X? The southern part half of North Highline did annex to Burien in 2009, and when the northern half was, where we are now, was offered that choice, the voters didn't approve that either, so it's sort of stuck, that's why you're stuck in limbo.
yeah, a lot of richer people in certain areas in Burien put up signs and stuff.
Yeah.
Put up signs the night before, just bombarded, and bombed 4th Avenue, 1st Avenue, and people that weren't involved or hadn't gone to any meeting, they didn't have a clue. They just saw these signs, no, no, no. And they hadn't been to any meetings or anything.
There were a
It
few
was
local
lines.
businessmen
It was
that didn't want to be
disgusting.
annexed too, and put up some
Disgusting,
static
yeah.
And lies.
and lies, yeah.
What about drug control? I mean, marijuana, we have a lot of marijuana available in this community. I'm not against marijuana per se, personally. I just want to say, we seem to have a big supply of it. A lot of businesses offer it. In my retail position, I smell a lot of people that have been imbibing very heavily. By and large, not youth, so I'll have to admit that. So, but do you know, is there anything new at the state level?
No, not on, and we did God, how many years has it been now? That we passed the, when the initiative passed, and then we went through and did some changes and, set up the structure. Liquor Control Board, used to be the liquor, now it's the Cannabis Board, sets up the rules. The zoning part the county has to decide where facilities can go, or the city, it's local government that does the decisions. And, there's also rules about can't be near, the school, there's only so many places they can go, is kind of what it amounts to. But the one thing I would say, and I would question for you guys, is that we haven't seen any increase in really crime around the businesses because of how strictly they're regulated. So, I mean, you ask about them, but is there a
Well,
problem?
every store has been robbed. Two at
Except one.
gunpoint.
Well, I think that goes to the federal level. They have to take it off the class, so these guys can get bank accounts.
Yeah, that
And
is.
not have cash on it. That's a big
I think
thing.
the issue goes to, we are one of the poorest communities in King County, and we have 6 stores concentrated in a small area. Other big cities, Berrien was allotted, 2 licenses? And we have, our stores are all within eyeshot of each other. And we were told initially that we wouldn't have any stores in our business district. We have 3 now. And then there's 3 in Top Hat right next to where they're building, where potentially 900 low-income families are going to live without a grocery store in the community. So it just seems like, and we don't benefit from any of the tax revenue from it either. And it's like, when liquor stores were controlled by the state, they would never have put that many liquor stores in close concentration. So why, was it allowed to put, because they weren't allowed in other places, but why then say, okay, we can put them all in your community? It just didn't,
It helped that the state had a monopoly on liquor, right? So the state wasn't gonna open 2 liquor stores next to each other when it operated them both.
And compete against itself.
Yeah.
With the state offers licenses to the cannabis businesses, but doesn't operate them, which I think is probably a good thing.
I don't think the feds would
I
let
should
us do
defer to
that.
Joe. I know that the county has taken action to prevent additional concentration based on really concerns that they heard from you all.
And this is something that I have every expectation that this community will make very clear as a concern in the sub-area planning process next year. To make sure that it's reflected in expectations and needs for zoning as that process really does a careful review of zoning from construction to business permits and what types of businesses. I want to point out again that these are legal businesses, that we have marijuana legal in the state by public initiative and need to be able to implement it. But I recognize that as we're learning to implement it, the density in White Center is a strong concern, and we need to be able to better respond.
Who is it a strong concern to besides the people in this community? Do your fellow council members, are they concerned?
I would suspect the one other council member I can think of who I know would have a concentration would share a concern.
Mr. Gossett?
Mhm.
That's interesting because you're looking at the 2 lowest income communities, basically communities of color. And it really appears to be, again, we were talking about this, taking advantage of the fact that we don't have the money to fight it. So when they get around to planning all this, there isn't any hope, is there, that the law could be tweaked so that, my question is, we have to wait until those businesses decide to leave, right?
Those existing businesses would be grandfathered in any resolution I can come up with, that I can think of. And when we were talking about this a year and a half ago or so, we were waiting for a court decision out of a Bellevue case about whether or not local jurisdictions could, other than proximity to schools and daycares, whether local jurisdictions could say that the businesses had to be a certain distance from each other, not just per se schools. And the case has been resolved, and we now know that that would be upheld. So that's a new option that wasn't believed to be on the table at the time.
So, but the grandfathering thing sounds like, that's fine, but is there something in there that says you can't hand your license over to somebody else when you're gonna go out of business? I mean, that's part of the problem with grandfathering, is some of these aren't the original license holder, and yet they started their store. I mean, they probably made it sound like they were.
We'd have to talk to permitting about, and the Liquor Cannabis Board about who owns the license and when a new business is established, and whether that cannabis license can be
I mean, some kind of
handed off.
restriction would be nice.
Right, understood.
I mean, it wouldn't be so bad if we at least benefited from some of the tax money that's collected here, but we don't.
Well, it does go into this, I'll go back to.
Goes into town.
You do in that it helps pay for
Schools, public
schools
health.
and public health and, all the other things that we're spending money on in the state, so, I
But
don't
the
know.
point is the proportionality. It's not the proportionality of what we're contributing.
Certainly not in marijuana, but but I want to caution us against getting into, I want to keep our marijuana revenue here, and then other communities will say they want to keep their revenue home too, and that we don't end up with a net loss of revenue to support North Highline.
Would you say that again, please?
Yeah, good point.
I think if we did a full analysis, we would find without a doubt that White Center, North Highline does not receive the amount of revenue from marijuana that is generated here.
Oh, yes.
But I think that if we wanted to only spend money in North Highline that is reflective of the money that comes from North Highline, you'd be at a loss. And so I think that's a game we want to be careful about playing.
Because other communities.
I want to keep our money here.
Right.
Well, if every community keeps their money here, I think it might not come out to North Highline's benefit.
What about if we had every other community that doesn't have the same level of low-income housing that we do, pay in to help support the housing that's here?
But when you're saying low-income housing, are you saying subsidized housing that's the county run, or are you talking about just lower rent?
I'm talking about housing that does not pay taxes.
Publicly owned.
That's publicly owned.
And not all of
So-
it. Low income, there's a federal tax credit, and there are quite a few buildings, like the new project over at Top Hat that we were talking about. They're not gonna pay taxes. There may be 900 people moving in there, but they are not going to pay taxes. Because they're providing housing for people at 60% and below of the median, but they're a private group from California.
Property tax.
Yes,
Yeah, I want to be clear the way you phrase it, that it doesn't mean that people who live there aren't paying other taxes.
oh, I'm
Right.
not talking about the people
No,
who
I
live
just wanted to
there.
be clear about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I knew you weren't.
Okay.
I wanted to
Yes, thank you.
make sure there wasn't a misimpression.
What kind of taxes do they pay, other than sales tax?
Sales tax is a regressive tax, they're paying a lot of their income out.
That's what you're talking
So
about, sales
so I
tax,
wouldn't
that's what
dismiss
they're
it,
paying.
right.
Sales are by far the biggest tax revenue stream for, certainly for the state, I think probably for
My property
county.
tax
Yeah.
is the highest thing I pay for taxes.
Cumulatively, sales tax for most families is much higher. You don't notice it because you don't pay it all at once, but certainly for the state, and for most households, for the state, sales tax is by far the biggest income stream, and for most households, sales tax are their biggest tax outlay. But it's not as easy to notice because you don't have to write a big check.
It's 10% of
10%
everything you buy in a store.
right.
Yes,
Now it's not deductible on your
Taxes are higher than sales.
Another
My
thing-
property taxes are higher. I mean, you spend of
taxes
it
are
based off
6,000,
what you
that's
spend.
$100,000.
I mean, you spend to what you make. My property taxes, I don't even spend that much. I itemize, so I add up my sales tax. It's less than a third of what I pay in property taxes.
But that's not true on an average of, people with big families and, it averages differently. But everybody admits we have a stupid, terrible, regressive tax system. And we refuse to do anything about it until we
Do something.
until we have the guts to do it. We're just gonna live with this. You're either gonna pay it that way or you're gonna pay higher sales tax.
When we do plan on, and one big priority for us in the legislature this year is to pass a capital gains tax, which is a much more fair option. It really falls heavily on people who've seen extraordinary growth in their net wealth, and that's a lot of people who've gotten very wealthy in the tech industry, who don't pay income tax. Of course, we don't have an income tax here, and that's not on the table in the near term, but the capital gains tax is in some ways an even more progressive step to rebalance the tax code. And there are a lot of legislators who would like to see some portion of that revenue go towards cutting property taxes. I do want to reiterate that property taxes were very high this year, but they will go down a noticeable amount, very significant amount next year. And that's, I know people don't tend to believe that because, the narrative people have about taxes is, they just go up and up and up. Next year, property taxes are going to go down by quite a lot. In fact, we voted on a $390 million property tax cut earlier this year, but it doesn't go into effect until the next calendar year.
So is the rate on the property tax going down?
Yes.
You know what the approximate percentage would be, or will it vary somewhat?
It really varies a lot, and that's kind of the complexity of the property tax structure is in some places, in some parts of the state levy makes up more of it than in urban areas where there's a lot of, where you have a fire levy and a school, and there's more local levies in this area. So I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what the percentage is. That's a good question though. It's 55 cents out of the 100 or so, but I'm sorry, I don't have that number on the top of my head.
But 1 year from last year, my tax evaluation went up for my property $100,000. So I don't imagine my property taxes are gonna go down, and they're already $5,800.
Okay, well, let me know next year. I think I think
Well,
your
they
property
may not,
tax.
if your property gain
I don't know
continues
why
gaining.
my property went up so much, except new houses went in next to me, maybe that's.
It was in the news today that property values in Seattle had gone down 12%.
Yeah,
So-
after they sent out their assessment values.
Well, yeah, you're right. Good point, sir.
Everybody's house is high rate.
So you really think that the capital gains tax has a chance?
I think it has a
I think
chance.
so.
It's a harder road in the Senate than in the House. We have strong support for it in the House, but I think it may pass both chambers this year. The result of the elections were very favorable to our party, and we think that.
Yay.
I agree.
And Joe did a lot of that work.
Yay.
But that significantly increases the likelihood of the capital gains tax, which we've been talking about for a number of years, finally making it into law.
But you don't have a hope for income tax, do you?
Well, that takes a vote of the people. I mean, we could pass it, but it still takes a vote of the people.
Not in the near term. I think that, I support an income tax, I've always supported an income tax, but I think given how resoundingly it got
Went
beat
down.
at the ballot the last time it was on the ballot.
In 2010,
In
it went down 2-1.
Yeah, and even in our district, which is one of the most liberal districts in the state, it got like 51% of the vote, so it got just creamed everywhere else. Anyway, so because I don't think that that's likely anytime soon until there's a shift in public opinion about income tax. But that said, capital gains is an even more progressive step, and it's one that we have more confidence in our legal footing on doing income tax.
So that doesn't require a vote of the people, I guess, huh?
It's not an income,
Councilmember Mcdermott, sorry to bring us back to somebody's house, but I wanted to ask if, as a King County council member, if there was ever a chance that the King County Council would actually bring it up to Seattle or some other city the annexation of the Highline area, being that I know it's a financial burden for King County to keep maintaining our area, and we obviously want to belong to someone. Is anything like that? I apologize for my ignorance. I'm not sure if that's actually a thing that happens, but is there going to be some sort of conversation that happens in terms of from the King County side to try to offer our area up for annexation, or is that entirely on the burden of the city who wants to annex us?
A city has takes the initiative to go define a potential annexation area, make a bid, if you will, and start dating and pursue that dowry. But yeah, so there is not a formal role for the county to go prod that conversation. But yeah, there's informal opportunities to have conversations with electeds and with people in departments about continuing the conversation, reminding Seattle, they said they'd have a vote on the ballot by 2018. And here we are. I don't think they're going to do that in the next 3 weeks. And if they're not, then the respectful thing would be to break up and let North Highline start dating again. To pound my dowry analogy into the ground.
Is that something that you would be willing to bring up?
Yes.
And I'd just say that we're gonna be seeing hopefully we'll be seeing Mayor Durkin she's never, I don't think she's said anything about it.
No.
So we can ask when we see her. It's, they usually, since the legislative session starts, all of these characters start coming and talking to us.
She's having breakfast, they're having breakfast with me on Monday morning, talking about the county's legislative agenda.
As someone pointed out though, this community has been more aligned with the southern area, or schools, or library, and many of our issues here are more related to the southern end as opposed to
Well,
Seattle.
my only point is that it has to go somewhere. And at this point, it seems to be completely up in the air, and as long as it moves in a movement to go forward, then at least it can go somewhere. So,
Can we start dating Burien?
Well, if Seattle says they don't
have to
Seattle
break
has
up.
a claim, then, and
Yeah.
if they don't
But I
relinquish their claim.
Yeah, well, we
If Seattle breaks up with you, then yes, you can start dating Burien.
It's a little bit of a weird analogy.
Let me try a whole different analogy, still about,
Because North Highline is a strong, independent person. We can do what we want.
yeah. I have sometimes thought, to make a historical analogy, of North Highline being like the colonies in the 1770s, when they were thinking about separating from Great Britain and starting the independence movement. Historians tell you about a third of the people wanted independence, and about a third of the people wanted to stay with Great Britain, and about a third of the people were just farming, living their daily lives, and weren't invested.
We've asked you guys a bunch of specific questions, but I'd love just to give you the opportunity to say what else is going on, and what are you working on, issues that are important to you that impact our community that you think we should be aware of?
One that I would highlight that I think has a potential, or not potential, very likely win for this community is, and the county's playing a major role in this, but there's a state funding headed this way to convert your most important bus line, the 120, into a rapid ride bus service, really improving service on that line. Also, a number of pedestrian safety improvements along with that. And the city, so the state is already providing $10 million. We provided $5 million in the last biennium, and we're going to hopefully provide $5 million in the next for the northern half, for the Seattle portion of that new rapid ride line. The city of Burien's application for another $10 million for their portion of the rapid ride upgrades was just recommended this week by the State Department of Transportation for that, approving that grant, and it's the largest grant for this. State doesn't provide a lot of money for transit projects, But within that bucket of transit projects, this is by far the largest grant that they're recommending approval of, and I wish Councilmember Marks was still here because she's done important work on the city council to make sure that moves ahead. So those improvements would really significantly improve transit connectivity for this community, and that's something that is important to me to make sure that that grant actually gets approved in the legislative session this year. And I think it's important both for the transportation choices for people in this community, but also for us as we move towards a more sustainable economy and move away from a heavy reliance on single occupancy cars. Providing those choices, I think, will be really beneficial in both speeding up transit, hopefully providing more frequent transit in the future, as well as more pedestrian safety. So I'm excited about that.
And I kind of already said that working on the mental health, because I think that, getting our community and behavioral health system better funded and, really the whole system in place. And you guys probably are not aware that the Medicaid portion of mental health is changing, where the county will go into what's called the whole person care this next year as of the first of the year. And so the managed care companies the Apple Health that we get, their contracts will be covering the mental health also, which we think will help with access in that regard. So that's probably the biggest thing I'd say. One thing that some of you might be interested in is that we also think that we'll get passed this year. We had hearings last year, and AARP actually ended up causing the problem so that it didn't get passed, but a long-term care trust for as there's many of us in here, baby boomers, but it's the people that are actually still working, that you can voluntarily start having a payroll deduction and be able to pay in, and I can't remember how many quarters it's gonna be before you could get it, but then once you need some long-term care, you wouldn't have to move into a nursing home, you don't have to be destitute, you'll have this benefit. So it's a voluntary program, and it's a payroll deduction. But will be I think we're gonna manage to be the first state in the country to get it passed. There's several states working on it, but I think we're gonna be the ones, and that's one that actually has penciled out that it's got bipartisan support too.
What about the Medicaid reimbursement rate? Is that going to go up? Because right now it affects the homeless. So in order for them to get the quality of care that they need at a skilled level, the rate we're getting right now is basically room and board. That's it. It doesn't pay for their therapies, nothing, no ancillars. So we're going in the hole, and that's leaving a lot of skilled nursing facilities closed.
So tell me which kind of we, are you a community health provider or a behavioral health provider, or?
I'm hearing nursing and rehab.
So, skilled facility.
Skilled nursing facility.
So yes, yes, you have to tell them. So they're looking at, there's an enhanced funding formula, and that I believe it's gonna be in the governor's budget to recommend that to us, that we increase the funding, because we're looking at trying to there's a lot of people at Western State that are actually ready for discharge and could go into facilities like yours that they don't need to be committed, there's just no place to send them. Right. And so yes, you're part of the solution. So yeah, those rates are going up.
Let me talk about two priorities, one broad county-wide and one very specific to North Highline. In July, I announced a gun safety action plan responding to the public health crisis we have of gun violence throughout our county and frankly throughout our country. And while Eileen and Joe have been very supportive of taking action on the state level, the state hasn't done as much as I believe the legislature needs to do. There is preemption restricting how much local governments can do. Much of the work is reserved to the state, but I announced 5 pieces of legislation that in July that now all 5 have been passed, including requiring safe storage of firearms, so that we can address the 35,000 people who die of gun violence each year in our nation, and hundreds within the county as well. That has been significant for me and included some major accomplishments within the budget to make sure that work was funded. as the county adopted our 2-year budget for the 2 years beginning January 1st. And then much more locally, some number of years ago, before I joined the council, the public pools that King County managed were spun off to their local cities, except for Evergreen Pool, because it was in unincorporated King County. There wasn't a city to spin it off to, but the county didn't have the money to keep running it, so they spun it off to a nonprofit. What's the difference between a nonprofit and a city in trying to run something? A city has a general fund to go to. A nonprofit doesn't have a general fund to go to. Brian Hastings and the crew working at Evergreen Pool and managing Evergreen Pool have done exceptional work to manage it, keep it open, and provide swim classes and all kinds of resources for this community. And have done so at, in some cases, personal investment and scrappy work to make it happen. In this budget, we have a understanding that for the first time, a recognition from the county that it's not fair to expect a nonprofit to manage the pool without any government support. And so there's some one-time capital money and ongoing annual funds to make up the operating deficit of the pool, making that investment here.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah. And big kudos to Brian Hastings and his board and the work they have done to manage it over years. They have been ingenious, they've been dedicated, and Brian has put some of his personal resources into it.
Really quickly, you mentioned that you were going to be doing a sub-area plan for this area. I think Seattle will also be doing some community planning work in the Highland Park neighborhood, which is just on the other side of Roxbury. Do you know if those two efforts will be working together at all? I think the timelines match up.
If the timelines I didn't know about the Seattle planning process, and by all means, they should match up and be hearing the same thing, I would hope, from the community. We shouldn't let Roxbury be a division in work and opinion. And
I thought we were gonna build a wall.
Are you funding that?
I can't help it.
So,
Since you brought up a more localized concern, I'll jump on that. And I wanted to start a conversation with you about a safety issue on 10th Avenue South. It's a persistent culture of reckless driving. You saw my email earlier. And by persistent, I mean decades old. As far as I can tell, I talked to a lot of the people that lived on the street for a long time, and they said, oh, that happens every day for years. It's been happening. What I mean by reckless driving, most of the time it takes the form of drag racing. And it correlates a lot with when the school comes out, lets out, but it's not necessarily always that. And I think it has to do, you may have seen in my email that the county roads folks, were trying to put it off on law enforcement. It's my opinion and my neighbor's opinion that law enforcement, that it's more about the placement and the roadway itself than a problem that law enforcement can solve, because basically, there's nowhere for that. I think that it's the fact that there's nowhere for the patrol car to sit that can't be seen, and I think that is, very much part of the reason why it's a popular spot to drag race. And I might also point out, often when the drag racing happens, there are also children present that are leaving school, and they don't have safe way to cross the street, or they also don't have sidewalks on both sides of the street. So anyway, unfortunately, my other neighbors couldn't make it here, but I'd really like to have a conversation with you later about it.
I'd be happy to. I hope you saw my reply, making sure you knew I would be arriving late, and I didn't want you to think I was standing you up or anything.
Oh, no, I didn't, yeah.
And I've seen some of the department's response, and we need to have a better dialogue about, if the department is saying no to speed bumps, as I read your email, you're not wedded to speed bumps, you're wedded to solving the problem.
I unfortunately led with speed bumps, but that was because I'm not a road engineer.
But I also kept reading, and every time you said speed bumps, you said, or other speed control.
Right,
And the
exactly.
department's replies were all about speed bumps, as I read it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I want to work with you.
Great.
Yeah.
Great, cool. I'll give you my contact information.
Yeah, great.
Okay, cool.
Joe, do you know if the county allows those kind of cameras like Seattle has where you automatically get a ticket if you exceed the speed limit?
Those are,
They're specific.
yeah, those are only allowed in school zones. So I
In
guess,
school zone?
I guess the question is about 10 feet or a red light.
Red light.
A red light camera.
Red light.
Well, then yeah, if it's a school zone, then.
I don't know if that, there's no real red lights in there though.
But
There's not
There's
many
red lights for schools.
we could put one there.
Is that per state mandate for those locations?
The state currently only allows traffic cameras at red lights and in school zones. I'm gonna be proposing also allowing them for bus lane enforcement, because that's a big problem on the West Seattle Bridge. But yeah, state law currently only allows it in those two places.
So why that restriction? Why not just, there's this street that has a problem? And I go to Boulder, Colorado. Have you ever been to Boulder? You know they have those little cameras on every single street.
Yeah, a lot of legislators really don't like the cameras, and they think that they are just for privacy reasons, and they I don't.
Well, there's constituents that complain
Yeah.
about it too.
Yeah, so they're just.
Not just using it as an example,
Yeah.
one city did
They're
it
just-
this way.
they're just very-
I'm not saying it should be.
It's not going to be easy even to pass it for bus lane enforcement. I would say just because there's a lot of legislators that just don't like the cameras, and I am not one of them. But we have to
This
get
is where the far
we
left
have
and
to
the
get
far right.
majority.
Yeah.
We have to get
Yeah.
majority support for this, and I think that. But I guess I don't know exactly how school zone how widely it defines school zone, but
I think it has to be in school where they have to, like where they put up the sign.
yeah, right.
Because I can talk to Joe about this very issue. I live on 107th
Yeah.
and 7th, 102nd and 7th, right? White Center Heights Elementary School.
Yeah.
And from 8th to 4th, on that road, it's a drag strip. And there's an elementary school right
Yeah.
there. So that could be a place for one of those lights.
Cameras.
There was a
Yeah.
question here.
Little cameras, yes.
For him, between 136th and 128th, some friends live over there, and there's speed bumps, and you do not speed down that street, because there's the next speed bump,
Yeah.
so
I mean,
it's right there, but,
yeah. There's I think a lot of
is a drag race too.
yeah. Anyway, I have
Well,
a question for Joe.
Fair enough.
I saw a lot of your legislation and fraud papers in the paper about the gun control issues or whatever, but what I'm not seeing in the paper or hearing is what the consequences for not the good guy that has his gun in a gun safe lock or gun safe or whatever with a safety, but the guy that broke into your house, which was locked and stole it, what's his punishment? Or the guy that goes and robs 7-Eleven with a gun, what's his? I don't see anything that says, if you do this, this is what, you're charging
Rob-
$10,000 if your gun gets stolen, but in any of these things.
No.
Only if you don't report it within
Right.
5
You have
days.
to report it.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
But I'm not seeing anything
What?
like, for the ones that are misusing these items,
Those are
what,
felonies.
Like 3
what,
separate.
what are, I've read several of the things, there's coming, before the elections and all that stuff, but I'm not seeing anything on the other side, like, so-and-so broke into this house and, first off, he broke into it, or the guy that robbed the guy down the street with a gun, or the guy that, shot the kid at the bus stop, or whatever. What are the consequences for the one misusing?
Burglary, theft, murder, are already felonies, are already offenses.
Also, there's
So
federal guidelines that add an additional 5 years on any prison sentence not eligible for parole.
If a firearm is involved.
Yeah.
Use of firearm.
So if you're stealing my property, whether it's my laptop or my handgun, you're breaking an existing law,
Right.
and that's enforced.
Well, we gotta catch them, but
I'm
yeah.
just not seeing anything to say to the bad guy, you do this and this is,
That's already on the
maybe he
books.
knows it
It's
already.
It's not
Yeah.
being enforced.
Well,
It's not being
Yeah.
enforced.
Not being enforced.
It just seemed like the hunter or the good guy was having all the things put on him, but I wasn't seeing the other side, like if you misuse it,
It's there.
this is what's gonna happen to
Your
you.
point, it might have been nice in the ads for the thing to point out that the other side's already covered with existing laws, because it is.
Yeah.
Good point.
I figured when you have your doors locked on your house, your guns are locked up. So is that not the case?
Well, if you don't get robbed, it doesn't matter. Nobody's gonna come in
Then
and
also,
inspect your house.
out of the 35,000, is that what you said the deaths across the country were every year?
Yes.
Guns? What is it, what's the percentage of suicide?
About 60.
60%.
But it's 60% with people who don't own the guns. Like, the 60% is not all people who own their own guns. It's often they take someone from their family member.
But they obviously have some mental health issues.
It's definitely.
And a gun enables them to make an irrevocable action instantaneously.
You
They'll
can do
just
that
find
with
another
drug
tool is all, if
overdose
they're in
too.
that bad a shape.
You can do drug
No,
overdose.
actually, I'll respond. The studies show on gun suicide, and it's actually usually more men that are like 50 to 70, I think, are the ages, that because of the fact that they have more access to guns, that it's people, when they commit suicide, it's a split decision, and the fact that they might have a gun available, they can act on it. And we have 2 areas of the state that are suicide, where we have more suicides than in other parts of the state, and it happens to be up in like northeast Tri, and down under Grays Harbor, down in the peninsula, which is also some of the highest areas of gun ownership. So there's mental health issues there too, that we need to have better access, but some of the things you worry about is the fact that when people have a quicker access, that they act on their thoughts.
And when you have access to a firearm and you attempt to commit suicide, you
Successful
succeed.
more often.
And most suicide attempts that are not with firearms are not successful, and most people who attempt to commit suicide tend to regret that they attempted. And so it's sort of that, if you have a 90+% chance of actually killing yourself if you're attempting suicide with a gun. So it is a public health issue.
Madam President, any update